Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Oh, stop it. Keep it down. We must have fed them before the show. They're very excited tonight. Welcome to the World Over Live. Lots to share with you. The budget battles continue in Congress, and a major sticking point seems to be the funding or defunding of Planned Parenthood. Here to give us the latest news on the impasse is New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith. And later, we'll discuss immigration policy, specifically that of the U.S. Bishops' Conference. What does the church teach, and what constitutes a moral system of immigration? Here to explain is the director of the USCCB's Office for Migration and Refugee Policy, Kevin Appleby. And we want to hear from you. How do you feel about the immigration policy of your country, whether you're in the United States or abroad? And should Planned Parenthood be defunded? If you'd like to be part of the show, the number 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. and internationally 205-271-2980. Or drop us an email, worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. As the world leaders met in London this week to discuss their involvement in the growing Libyan conflict, Pope Benedict XVI and church leaders in northern Africa are calling for an end to the fighting. On Sunday, the Holy Father made an urgent appeal for the immediate start of dialogue and the suspension of the use of weapons. Pope Benedict cited his own growing trepidation for the safety and security of civilians. The Pope's concern was warranted. The Apostolic Vicar of Tripoli reported that on the following day, Western airstrikes caused the collateral deaths of 40 civilians. The bishops of Northern Africa affirmed explicitly the comments of Pope Benedict. They also made a, quote, urgent appeal to find a just end to this painful conflict. Meanwhile, U.S. involvement in the Libyan conflict prompted a response from the U.S. Bishops' Conference. The comments, however, were quite different than that of the Holy Father and their brother bishops in Northern Africa. A letter to National Security Advisor Thomas Donnellan. In a letter, Albany Bishop Howard Hubbard, chair of the Bishops' Committee on International Justice and Peace, said the U.S. bishops first shared the Holy Father's apprehension over the Libyan conflict, but then, citing the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the letter said that in the judgment of the U.S. bishops, military intervention in Libya, quote, appears to meet the just cause criterion of Catholic teaching on just war. The letter continues that the USCCB, however, has, quote, refrained from making definitive judgments in light of the many prudential decisions beyond its expertise. And on Capitol Hill, as Republicans and Democrats appear to be one step closer to a budget deal for the rest of this fiscal year, there's disagreement over the defunding of Planned Parenthood. According to a Politico report on Wednesday, Republican Speaker John Boehner told the White House this week that House Republicans would not agree to strip any of its already approved amendment riders, which included defunding Planned Parenthood and National Public Radio. Vice President Joe Biden, negotiating on behalf of the White House, calls the riders non-starters. More on this in our next segment. Meanwhile, the House voted this week to reinstate the Washington, D.C. school voucher program for low-income students. The D.C. Opportunity Scholarship Program enables needy students to opt out of D.C.'s struggling public schools, providing them with up to $12,000 in private school tuition. President Barack Obama and the Democrat-led Congress cut off the popular program to new students in 2009. Speaker Boehner, who introduced the bill to revive the program, blamed America's education establishment for the program's demise. According to a statement released by the Obama administration on Tuesday, the president strongly opposes opening the program to new students, but it stopped short of a veto threat. And the pro-life legislation has advanced in several states this week. Arizona became the first state to criminalize abortion based on sex or race selection. Republican Governor Jan Brewer signed the bill into law on Tuesday. The law makes such abortions a felony. Doctors performing the abortions could face up to 7 years in jail. And in Virginia, Republican Governor Bob McDonnell signed legislation requiring abortion clinics to follow the same standards for patient safety as hospitals. Abortion advocates complain that the cost of complying with the new requirements will likely force the closure of as many as 17 of Virginia's 21 abortion clinics. The regulations are expected to take effect at the start of the new year. And in Kansas, the state's legislature overwhelmingly passed a fetal pain bill, which strictly limits abortions past the 21st week. The bill justifies the restrictions by noting medical evidence showing the fetus can experience pain at that point of gestation. Kansas legislators also approved a parental consent bill, which requires both parents to sign off on the abortion of a minor. Governor Sam Brownback is expected to sign all of those bills. In spite of a struggling economy, tithing in U.S. churches appears to be on the rise. The third annual State of the Plate survey, released Wednesday, showed an increase in donations at 43% of U.S. churches last year. That's up 37% from the year before. It wasn't all good news. Donations fell at 39% of the churches polled. Perhaps the most interesting number, more than 90% of religious leaders expressed concern that plans by President Obama to reform tax breaks for charitable giving could harm donations. Christian faith communities in the U.S. receive more than $2 billion annually through tithing. And a bit of a respite this week in Sino-Vatican relations. A Chinese bishop has been ordained with the full approval of the Holy See. Bishop Paul Liang Jiashen was consecrated on Wednesday to head the Jiangmen Diocese. All of the bishops who participated in the ordination ceremony are in communion with the Holy See. The Chinese government also approved of the ordination. Relations between the Holy See and the communist regime in Beijing have been strained severely during the past year. In November, you might remember, Beijing pushed forward with the illicit ordination of a bishop and forced several other bishops to participate in the ordination. And in December, they again compelled Catholic bishops to attend a meeting to elect new leaders for the government-run Catholic Patriotic Association. The Jiangmen Diocese has been without a shepherd since 2007. It's a place of pilgrimage for thousands of faithful. St. Francis Xavier died there in 1552. And the largest of the Catholic Church's Eastern rites has received a new leader this week. Major Archbishop Sviatoslav Sevchuk was elected primate of the Greco-Catholic Church of Ukraine by his brother bishops in Kiev. The church had suffered from political persecution and theological conflict with the Russian Orthodox Church for hundreds of years. Following the election, Archbishop Shevchuk took a delegation of hierarchs to Rome, where they were received by the Holy Father. The Archbishop said he would seek the restoration of the Greco-Ukrainian Church as a patriarchate, which would allow them more autonomy. Both Pope Benedict and John Paul II before him have postponed the designation out of deference to the delicate relations with the Russian Orthodox Church. And with Easter just around the corner, there's still time to pick up a copy of the Truth and Life dramatized audio Bible for yourself or a loved one. It's the only Vatican-endorsed, fully dramatized New Testament available anywhere. I got a note this week from a Monsignor Christopher. I won't give you his last name, but I wanted to share it with you. He writes, I've listened to the other audio versions of the Bible, but they were mostly just narration. Very dry and almost boring. However, the Truth and Life audio Bible brings the New Testament to life. The readers give emotion and meaning to the words, and the background music and sounds make one feel as though they were right there in the same room. The spirit which is embodied in the work comes forth loud and clear. the Word of God truly comes alive. And remember, I've posted the entire Gospel of Mark so you can give it a listen at RaymondArroyo.com. It's a free gift to you. And if you'd like to purchase the entire Truth and Life audio Bible, click the banner at the top of the site. And if you're planning a trip to D.C., why not experience the World Over live, in person, Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern? Drop us an email at worldoverdc@yahoo.com. We'll reserve a seat for you. Up next, Congressman Chris Smith wants to end abortion funding in the federal budget. Can he? The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
My next guest is co-chair of the Pro-Life Caucus in the House of Representatives and a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. He joins us tonight to talk about the ongoing budget battles in Congress and the effort to strip abortion funding from the federal budget, as well as Libya. Welcome back to the program, Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey.
Thank you.
Great to have you back. Now, let's start. There is a titanic battle on the Hill between the Democrats and the Republicans, the White House and the House, over what to cut in this budget. Yeah. You all passed a budget earlier this year, and there were $61 billion worth of cuts. The latest compromise, the magic number everybody's going for now, is $33 billion. Why? What happened to the big? We've got to cut deep. We've got to.
Well, I know our leadership, John Boehner and the rest of our Republican leadership, is fighting for the greatest amount of cut. We are in dire circumstances, the likes of which I have never seen. We're well over $14 trillion in debt, en route to a $25 trillion debt by the year 2021. It is totally unsustainable. We're bankrupting our future, our children's future, and I've never seen such irresponsibility on the part of the White House or the Democrats, especially on the House and Senate side, who are saying, no, we're not going to go along with those cuts. Added to that, the budget we're dealing with now is the leftover product of the Democrats from last year. This should have been done by the end of September. They punted for the election purposes, and so now we're cleaning up a budget that is the 2011 budget. We haven't even begun the 2012 budget. We are sticking to H.R. 1, which cut by $61 billion of discretionary funding.
But wait, the leadership isn't sticking
well,
to that.
I believe they will.
Speaker Boehner today, he's agreeing, it seems, with this $33 billion figure.
Wait until you see what actually comes out, because I'm not convinced that we're going to go with such a paltry cut. And remember, we're talking about rates of growth in most cases. The budget will still rise, just not as much as the Democrats would like. We'd like to go back at least to 2008 levels before this spending spree extraordinaire, which is, again, has the capability of bankrupting the United States of America. Now, that's how serious this is.
You co-sponsored something called the Title X Abortion Provider Prohibition Act.
Yes.
Tell me what that act, it passed.
Yeah.
What does the bill do?
Well, there are 5 new riders. Many of them are old riders, as we call them, pro-life policies that are added to appropriations bills, including defunding abortion in the District of Columbia. Obama won on that. We are now paying for abortion on demand right up until birth, although most of them are done between the 12th or the 24th week. And there are a number of clinics within earshot of your studio that do abortions at 24 weeks. They will be paid for by public funding. We can stop that. H.R. 1 had a prohibition in there. We are looking to enact the Pence Amendment, named after Mike Pence, which defunds Planned Parenthood, which itself has done 5.6 million abortions since 1977. And for the last year for which information is available, they did 332,000 abortions in their network of clinics, and they're building more abortion clinics every day.
I want to play a little clip. Now, we hear, and we've been hearing for weeks since you pushed this legislation, the CEO of Planned Parenthood, Cecile Richards, has come out and said, I have a friend, Ceci Royals, forgive me, Ceci. Cecile Richards came out and said, wait a minute, we provide health services to women, including mammograms. Listen to this.
What's going to happen as a result of this, if this bill would ever becomes law, millions of women in this country are going to lose their health care access, not to abortion services, to basic family planning, mammograms.
Now, she said they'd be losing services like mammograms. This group, Live Action, this week, Lila Rose's group, they're calling it a sting operation. All they did was call Planned Parenthood clinics across the country. I believe they called 30 clinics. None of them said mammograms are offered. We'll play a little bit of the phone call. I want you to react.
Planned Parenthood, Georgetown, this is Samantha. How can I help you?
Hi, Samantha. I have a quick question. I was hoping that I could come into Planned Parenthood for a mammogram. Do you guys provide mammograms?
We do not provide mammograms. Let me give you a number to one family health centers, because they're going to be able to advise you a little better than I am, because we don't deal with the health side of it so much. We're mostly a surgical facility.
A surgical facility? Yeah. What do you hear there?
Well, we know for a fact that Planned Parenthood is not an oncology center. They're not a mammography center. They may make a referral from time to time, but they are not in the business of providing care.
They don't have mammogram machines in their clinics.
But this is part of their deception, the art of misdirection, which they have so honed over the years, of talking about what they do occasionally over here, while the mainstay of what Planned Parenthood does are abortions. 332,000 in 2009 alone. They are the abortion business. They're an industry. And just like sometimes people are upset with big pharma, they're upset with, mega industries, they are the mega abortion industry in every state of the union, including the ones you mentioned just a moment ago that just passed pro-life legislation. Who is arguing most passionately against those pro-life initiatives? Planned Parenthood.
$363 million in taxpayer funds.
Huge.
Now, Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, and Joe Biden, the vice president, is saying these riders, including particularly the Planned Parenthood rider and the EPA cuts, those are non-starters. So what happens with
Well,
this
I think
in the
we
budget?
need to stand our ground on all of the riders, including the Mexico City policy, which divests our funding overseas for non-governmental organizations to going to groups crusading for abortion on demand, as they are doing under the Obama administration. Day 2 of his presidency, he reversed the Bush-Reagan, goes back to Reagan, policy on not funding these groups if they're involved in the performance of abortion or the lobbying for abortion overseas. Then there's the D.C., like I mentioned. And there's also the UN Population Fund. Obama has given over $100 million to the UN Population Fund, which has a hand-in-glove, very tight relationship with the population control cadres in China that carry out forced abortion, one of the greatest crimes against women in all of human history. They're missing 100 million girls in China because this is a 30-year and counting policy initiated back in 1979, the one child per couple policy, which relies on coercive sterilization and forced abortion. We gave them $100 million, even though they are totally complicit in those crimes.
Okay, so what is your gut? You think that this will survive this budget negotiation?
We're going to
the Planned Parenthood defunding
I hope
and
not,
the Mexico
and we're going to
City?
fight to ensure that the policies are in the final product. And frankly, this is worth risking a government shutdown. What are we talking about? We're talking about innocent lives.
And tell me, what gets shut down? We hear this talk. They say non-essential services will go away.
Yeah.
What are non-essential services?
Well,
what are we
Congress
talking about?
stops meeting.
Hey,
so
now there's a non-essential service I can support.
And many of the, what we would
it's the
grant making,
Smithsonian's, it's the national parks, it's
and
those
frankly,
things
when
that
we
were
did
shut.
it before, when it happened before, I wouldn't say when we did it, those government employees who lost perhaps a few days of work got paid retroactively. So it's not the end of the world. The military keeps flying its aircraft. The ships are still deployed overseas. There's too much hype. It's a government slowdown, not a shutdown. And frankly, to preserve innocent human life from the violence of abortion, which is what the riders are all about. 5 separate policies, plus Obamacare. There's a whole section in there that seeks to defund Obamacare, which we're finding...
That's not going to withstand the Senate
that may not, but
right?
we'll try.
Okay.
We'll certainly try.
I want to switch gears for a moment before I go to some emails and calls. Libya. We went into Libya last week. Who are these rebels? The United States, joining NATO, went in. We're doing these airstrikes. Who are these rebels?
Well, great question, but you're asking the wrong person. We had a Foreign Affairs Committee hearing today, and I asked that. It was my very first question that I posed. I said, who are they? And I also asked, and I didn't get an answer, when we the first sortie flew over Iraq, the no-fly zone, and now it's called no-fly zone plus. Did we know who they were then? Do we know who they are now? Apparently, we have people on the ground trying to ascertain who the rebels are. Yeah, but are they jihadists? Are they...
On Monday, the president said, these are doctors and lawyers. Yeah. That we know these people. They're doctors and lawyers. Today, we find out on Wednesday, the CIA was actually sent in to figure out who these people are.
And we don't know still. It still has not been sorted out. And that is a very, very risky gamble. If we become the Air Force for a group of people, the vision for Iraq, for Libya that they have, we don't have a clue. We really don't. They've made some statements about, they want to have democratic principles. We don't know if they're being coached. So it's a very serious...
Well, the whole point of this was to protect the civilian population. Yeah. That was the mandate
I
asked
that question.
Of the
I asked
UN.
the question today. The language in the UN resolutions, 1973, is it what is a civilian? Is it somebody carrying an AK-47 or behind, a machine gun? Who are they? And there's no answer to that one either. Well, so it's a very fluid, very flexible set of definitions.
We learned today from the Apostolic Nuncio in Tripoli, 40 civilians have been killed. He said the so-called humanitarian raids have killed dozens of civilian victims in some neighborhoods of Tripoli. This is Giovanni Innocenzo Martinelli. Is this, in your estimation, a just war?
No. I think we should, the no-fly zone, if it were to be promoted to stop violence and to aid a rebel insurgency, we have to have a very clear picture of who it is that we're backing and what it is, what vision they carry forth. It wasn't in a military situation, but we threw the Shah of Iran literally under the bus. The Ayatollah Khomeini came in, and Iran went from bad to significantly worse and a threat to all of the Middle Eastern countries ever since, and all the areas of the Persian Gulf. We got to be very careful who it is, especially when we assume a fighting posture and put men and women of the United States Armed Services at risk. They're carrying out their responsibilities because they're ordered to do it with great heroism, with great professionalism. They really are, notwithstanding the fact that some civilians have died. That certainly was not their intent. That said, before you put our Air Force and our fighter planes off the aircraft carriers in that situation, know who it is that we're backing.
I want to go to the emails, a lot of emails about the budget, this budget issue. This comes from Ed in Cincinnati. Representative Smith, has the GAO scored or ruled on the misappropriation of $20 million to promote abortion in Kenya in their constitution? I would think this is a violation of appropriations law and could lead to some impeachments.
Well, it's a very serious violation. I actually initiated it.
You were just in Kenya. Tell us about that. I was just in
Kenya. Matter of fact, the pro-abortionists are very worked up about it. They, under President Obama, they being the pro-abortion non-governmental organizations, received $61.5 million, as well as a number of Islamic groups, because Sharia law was contained in the Constitution, as was a right to abortion for health reasons. The members of Parliament wanted a life of the mother exception only. They wanted to have a life begins at the moment of conception, which they have. In came the non-governmental organizations and the pro-abortion tsunami that hit as this Constitution was being written, and in goes a health exception, and we all know what health means. Our hope is that it can be limited through additional legislation. It's unclear whether or not that will gain muster because it'll be ruled by ruled on by the courts of Kenya. But the Obama administration broke the law, in my opinion. There's an amendment called the Cisgender Amendment that says that no federal funding can be used to either support or lobby for abortion legalization or for a pro-life perspective. That keeps us out of it. That was crossed that line in the sand significantly. The General Accountability Office has an ongoing study going on right now to look at that $61.5 million. I asked for it. I was joined by some of my colleagues in doing that. Our hope is that they will get into the emails, get into the, into the bowels of what really happened here. As WikiLeaks has clearly shown, there's a lot of chicanery that goes on in some of our embassies abroad, including our embassy in Nairobi. So much so that the Parliament of Kenya was so upset with our ambassador there that they had a vote of no confidence, the equivalent of recently. So it has hurt our standing. Unfortunately, the Kenya model is now, by the Obama administration, they're looking to replicate it elsewhere in Africa and use U.S. funding to bring in abortion on demand.
This is from Marcia. She says, I'm a Democrat. I love the show. My question, is there a way to make the necessary budget cuts without gutting important programs in human services? Do either the Republicans or the Democrats have any plans to create a real long-term 3, 5, 10-year plan to eliminate the deficit that will then inform how we make strategic cuts?
Well, I think that's where the hard lift comes in, of going through every budget line by line. I don't like, frankly, across-the-board cutting where you just say, take 5% or 10% out. It is kind of like a tourniquet, and it may have a usefulness at some point. But it actually then means that the FBI gets cut, so law enforcement gets injured, and some of the vital health might go by the boards. We need to do it very carefully with a surgical knife, but we do have to do significant cuts. Obama, through many programs, including the so-called stimulus, which has not worked, where are the jobs, has just added to our deficit in an unconscionable way. And remember, 42 cents of every dollar we appropriate now is borrowed. If you or I or people in the audience were to borrow like that, we'd be in bankruptcy court. Well, we can't just keep printing new dollars and selling more treasury notes to China and elsewhere to sustain that debt. It's unsustainable.
It's going to be a brutal fight. I mean, I see some of the funds, the things you're looking to do, very laudable programs. We're going to be talking to Kevin Appleby in our next segment. Right. The bishops do an incredible job placing refugees. They do. That funding is on the chopping block. I've seen some of it.
Not all of it. Not all of it.
No, not all of it, but some of it is. You have a bill in the wings, a Domestic Minors Sex Trafficking Deterrence Act, and in it is funds to take care of these victims who are involved in sex trafficking. Right. What are the chances of that surviving?
Well, very tough now, because any new spending on new programs that are not pre-existing will probably be voted down or not even allowed to come to the floor because we don't have money. And that's an initiative that I am deeply wedded to.
Yeah. I want to go to the phones. Pat from Wisconsin, go ahead very quickly. What's your question?
Real quick question. I have information that there are ground troops in South Korea. They're on high alert waiting to go over to Libya. Why are our troops there going to Libya?
Wow.
No idea. You're very connected to the CIA, I see. Pat, go ahead.
Well, the president has made clear that there will be no U.S. ground troops. I hope that's true, because I don't support it. But I asked the question today, and I actually took a page out of Sun Tzu's Art of War book, which was written several thousand years ago by a master strategist in China, that you never tell your opponent, if you are at war, what is on the table and what is off, because it confused and confound his defense planning or offensive planning is something you need to do. I was shocked that the president took that off the table.
Before we'd even gone in.
But having said that, we should not do it. But don't say it. Yeah. Leave him guessing, he being Gaddafi, since we are putting men and women at risk, not just from the U.S., but in the coalition, who are flying those planes. I mean, Plus, now we found out from the New York Times and elsewhere that we have CIA operatives on the ground. Putting people on the ground and boots on the ground, whether it be, U.S. Army or Rangers or Marines, or CIA, is a distinction without a difference. So, the AP did a fact check on the president's speech, and it was riddled with exaggeration by the president. I wish he wouldn't do that. Be absolutely transparent. Don't say what you don't want to say. You know, he could have left no troops on the ground.
But don't exaggerate.
But don't exaggerate, and don't, I mean, NATO's going to take over the operation. We largely run NATO, although it will perhaps be staffed and tasked by non-U.S. troops, but we don't know that yet. So there's, you know, he's far too reassuring for the political side, and if that puts one pilot and one aviator at risk because he's playing a political calculation for public opinion, that too would be decidedly wrong.
Very good.
You got to do what's good for our men and women in uniform first.
Congressman Chris Smith, thanks so much for being here as always. We'll check in with you as this budget battle continues on Capitol Hill. If you'd like to check up on Congressman Chris Smith's work, visit his website, chrissmith.house.gov. When we return, we'll talk about the morality of immigration policy with Kevin Appleby of the Bishops' Conference. What should be our policy toward undocumented immigrants? The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there. Great job. Great job.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. Throughout the European Union, governments are limiting visas to immigrants and raising the bar to citizenship. In the United States, depending on the estimates, there are between 11 to 20 million undocumented immigrants living in the country. With talk of comprehensive immigration reform, violence on the borders, and efforts in Arizona to enforce federal law, what should be done? And what moral considerations should accompany the social and political concerns? To provide us with some answers, I'm joined by Kevin Appleby. He's the director of the Office of Migration and Refugee Policy for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Kevin, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Great to see you. Let's start with, what does the church require? What is asked of policymakers and the American people?
That this issue is looked at from a humanitarian perspective. Raymond, often this is debated in terms of social concerns, economic concerns, rule of law concerns, and those are all legitimate. What the bishops are bringing to the debate is that this is about human beings as well. As you mentioned, 11 to 20 million human beings that are in this country. They are out of status, but they have families, they have values which all Americans share. They work hard, they want a better life for their children, for themselves. So how do we solve that humanitarian problem that we have? Yes, we need to secure our borders. Yes, we need to enforce our laws. But we also have 11 million people that need a solution, and we're not going to be able to deport them all. I think everyone on both sides of the debate agree that we're not going to be able to deport 11 to 20 million people.
But it does look like the numbers, I read a Pew study that said that the enforcement has apparently led to a 2/3 drop in illegal immigration. And over the last 10 years, 300,000 between 2007 and 2009. What does that tell you?
Well, look at the years. That's the years where the economy has been down. And the economy is what's running this. We have a system that says keep out at the border, but help wanted at the workplace. And that's what drives the migrants who come and can make more money here in the United States. And they fill jobs which a lot of people might not be willing to take. So you have to look at the economic impact. Also, the buildup along the border, people who come, a lot of times migrants want to come and work and then go home. But they might not go home when we have such a border that's full of Border Patrol. They'd be scared to go back. So.
I want to throw this out to callers. If you want to comment or if you have a question about this, what do you think immigration policy should look like? Give us a ring. 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. Internationally, 205-271-2980. Be very interested to hear your opinion of this, you folks listening in and watching internationally. Or send us an email, worldover@EWTN.com. We're talking to Kevin Appleby. Kevin, let's move on. You had a meeting this past week with the Homeland Security Chief, Janet Napolitano.
We did.
Tell me about the meeting.
Well, we met with the Secretary to talk just about that, enforcement, which is her charge as the head of Department of Homeland Security, but to sort of inject some humanity into it. We raised several issues with her, one about providing protection for Haitians who aren't able to go back now because of the earthquake. We talked about children that come across the border that aren't screened, for example, for being victims of human trafficking. We talked about the detention system and how some who are detained don't have to be detained. They might be asylum seekers who are fleeing persecution. They're no threat to the community, so they shouldn't be detained.
Tell me about this E-Verify system, this employer verify system that's in place. You don't like that system.
That's not true. It's not that we oppose that system per se. What the system does is it requires all employers to check their employees for valid Social Security numbers.
Before they hire them?
Before they hire them, yes. And in some cases, to go back to those that have been hired to check their Social Security numbers. The bishops don't oppose that. That's a valid enforcement policy that could be adopted. What the bishops are saying, though, is that we have to look at the 11 million that are in the workplace that are out of status and bring them into the system, and then the system can work. Then we're going to restore the rule of law. Otherwise, you're going to have 11 million people off the books working underground economy and undercutting U.S. workers. So we don't want that. We need it done in a comprehensive way. We need to look at this workforce, bring them out of the shadows and into the system.
I want to read something. We'll put it up on the screen. This is Pope Benedict on the 97th World Day of Migrants and Refugees. He says, states have the right to regulate migration flows and to defend their own frontiers, always guaranteeing the respect due to the dignity of each and every human person. Immigrants, moreover, have a duty to integrate into the host country, respecting its laws and national identity. Where is the U.S. failing here?
Well, where the U.S. is failing is that we don't have the visas required to meet the demand for workers. There's only 5,000 permanent visas in the system for unskilled workers. But before the economy went down, we had 300 to 500,000 workers come in here out of status. They would get jobs within 6 months. So there's an incongruency there.
In the UK, we're seeing a change in immigration policy. David Cameron announced he'd like to keep the population under 70 million. They are severely restricting, cutting back to only 25% the number of student visas. And they have raised the bar. Only the best and the brightest, those are his words, are going to be allowed admission in. So they don't want unskilled workers. They want highly skilled ones to be in the UK. What's wrong with that approach?
Well, there's nothing wrong with it, but what you're going to have is a system where you have overly educated people filling in not enough jobs, and you won't have people who are driving cabs, who are doing the farm work, which is important to this country, who are doing the jobs that we need to have done in this economy to make the economy go. Let me just say this, Raymond. The competitive advantage that our country has is that we've been able to integrate immigrants better than anyone in the whole world, and it's helped us over time become the great nation that we are. We have to remember that heritage, that we have the advantage of integrating immigrants and welcoming them, and we have that advantage economically over the world.
I want to talk for a moment about something I picked up on. This is March 13th. The Pope spoke to Italian legislators in Italy, and he said, citizenship must be considered, we'll put it up full screen for you, citizenship must be considered today within the full context of globalization. It is necessary to combine solidarity and respect for the law, lest they upset social life, and the principles of law and culture and even religious tradition, which formed the Italian nation, must be taken into account.
Yes.
Interpret that for us. He's clearly mentioning there that there's a Christian ethos. There's something that needs protection within the country as well that needs to be taken into account.
Yes. Well, true. But he's not saying that there shouldn't be religious freedom.
No, I don't think that's at all
what he's saying. But he's saying that, that people their beliefs should be respected when they come into a country. A country should allow them to worship as they choose, and should welcome them, I think, is what he's saying.
It seems that he's saying, he's saying the principles of law and cultural and even religious tradition which form the Italian nation must be taken into account. He's talking about the particular culture of the host nation, that needs to be considered. For instance, right now, Italy is literally putting up barriers and keeping African refugees escaping the horror show happening in Libya and elsewhere, saying, wait a minute, France started this, they should get the immigrants. That's what they're saying. Your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I mean, exactly. Let me just clarify something for your viewers. The sovereign has a right to control its borders and can weigh the different factors. The church has never said that you should allow anyone in on any occasion, but there are several factors that should be considered. the common good of the citizenry is one of the citizens of that country is one of them, and that's I think what the Pope is speaking to.
Okay, let's talk for a moment in the broad sense. When you say comprehensive immigration reform, what does that mean?
It means let's look at the whole system. Let's just not look at the border. Let's just not look at our interior enforcement. Let's look at our legal immigration system. Does it equip us for the 21st century? Will it serve our labor needs well into the 21st century? Will it reunify families? So let's look at the whole system and fix it all at once. What we're seeing now is a piecemeal approach, which is not going to solve the problem in time. And I think a comprehensive approach will certainly solve the problem or go one step in the right direction.
I want to go to a caller, then I want to talk about this horrific family separation, which I know people who skilled, college-educated here in America who've had their families torn apart because of the irregularities in the system. I want to talk about that in a moment. Colleen from Oregon, what's your question?
The legislature here just passed through a law that the illegal immigrants coming into Oregon can go to college as if they were living here, that they were a regular. Our kids can't get into college. They've raised the prices so high. That's what my question is.
What's the question? Why is this going on, and is this fair?
Yeah, that's not even legal, and they're passing it through so that the illegal immigrants can come in and they can go to college.
I got it.
Like they lived in this state.
Right. And you all, the bishops, have supported the DREAM Act, which is a national version of this.
Right. And I don't know the particulars of the Oregon law, but the DREAM Act students are students who came here when they were children with their parents. So they didn't come here on their own volition and knowingly broke the law. They came as children because their parents brought them here, which is what most of us, if not all of us, would do. Now they're in a limbo status. You know, they don't know the country that they're coming, they were born in. Some of them don't even speak that language, but they don't have the opportunity to advance and to contribute to the country. So they're sort of stateless. And there's thousands and thousands of these kids that have no future, but they don't have a country to go back to. So we're trying to get them out of that limbo state.
Some people are emailing and saying, you know, they even people in this country have to prove their citizenship, their state credentials, residency to go to certain colleges. You know, where's the equity here? And someone else asked, how do you pay for all of this? The DREAM Act and these sort, you know, I mean, it's very nice, it's wonderful. And if the church could do it, that would be the best of all possible worlds, if the church had the unlimited means. But I know you don't have unlimited means either.
No. What we're arguing is that these people, first of all, they're the best and the brightest. These are kids that have graduated high school near the top of their class. It's an investment in future leaders, is what we're saying. Now, we're not saying that they should get, you know, help above a U.S. citizen, but they should have an opportunity at least to apply to college and get into college and, you know, access loans where it's possible to get them loans. We think this is an investment and that over time, they're going to contribute all that back in taxes over their lifetime.
Now, I've been studying this a great deal. You and I spoke a few weeks ago about this. It seems to me if we could boil this down, and I'm not going to read some of these emails to you. They are passionate.
I get them myself.
I'm sure you get them yourself, and you will hear more.
That's fine.
But what they all seem to be saying is, if I can interpret, it's the benefits that people are griping about.
Right.
The real concern here is not that they don't want to welcome immigrants, because we're all immigrant stock. My father was an immigrant. Many people are saying, I came from an immigrant. We came here legally, blah, blah, blah. Here's the question. Is there a way to separate the benefits out so that people coming in, getting a way to work into the system as a citizen is not entitled to the same level of benefits? Because everything I've been reading is the difficulty is you have a large, unskilled workforce who've come into the country through illegal means. And once they're here, they don't make enough money in taxes and contribute enough in taxes to offset the benefits they're receiving. So it becomes a numbers thing that the government simply can't sustain these extra people. You'd say what to that?
Well, first of all, undocumented immigrants aren't eligible any sort of welfare benefits in this country. The only thing that they would get.
A moment ago, you said they contribute to taxes, and they do get. I mean, there's SSI benefits, and there are things that they can.
Well, they do pay taxes when some of them pay directly to the IRS, and the IRS doesn't check their status. They pay sales taxes, they pay property taxes. So they contribute to the economy, they contribute to the fiscal situation in this country. And what we're saying is bring them out of the shadows and make them fully pay. Make them pay every bit that they owe when they work and let them contribute fully to the country. And we think overall, that's going to be a benefit economically to the country. There's a battle of studies on whether immigrants drain the economy or give to the economy. But what most show is that in the first few years, yeah, they might take some from the economy. But if they stay longer, and especially if their children stay longer, it benefits the economy overall.
Yeah, well, and I've seen some of those stuff. I mean, and you're right. There's a wide variety, and you have to sort of interpret them.
Right.
Let's talk for a moment about the cuts being contemplated on Capitol Hill. You heard Congressman Smith before. This is a dire financial situation the country's in. It seems if the Republicans in the House have their way, Migration and Refugee Services would be cut by 45%.
Yeah.
The Office of Refugee Settlement would be cut by 10.4%. You all receive roughly $80 million in federal grants to resettle refugees. What would a cut like that mean to the church's work?
Well, it's not so much the church's work, but it's the people we serve. That would mean that we wouldn't be able to provide the follow-up services to refugees that come here to make sure that they're integrated fully, that they fully learn English, they're able to get jobs, they're able to get housing, etc. So the follow-up services wouldn't be there. It would also mean that refugees overseas, refugees that are fleeing Libya, for example, Iraqi Christians who are in the Middle East wouldn't be getting basic needs taken care of because the United States helps provide that to refugees around the world. So, I mean, people might disagree as to whether that should be a priority in a down situation, but what we would say is that these are very vulnerable people that, you know, when they come to the United States and we help them, they eventually invest in the United States. And then overseas, you've got people who are kindred spirits, even Catholics, who won't get their needs taken care of if these cuts go through.
Let's continue talking about these cuts, because I know there's this $80 million of federal grants annually. I am told a chunk of that, upwards of $1 million, goes to offset the administrative costs, indirect costs at the conference, pays for utilities and other things. How will that affect the running of the conference and the conference work itself, the Bishops' Conference?
Well, I mean, first of all, we don't get $80 million. The whole system might get that, but the Bishops' Conference doesn't get that much money.
What would be the amount? That's what all the data I saw, it looked like an $80 million grant, between 50 and 80, and it's the most recent projections are 80 million, yeah?
Right. But that goes to all the organizations to do the resettlement, and a lot of that money that we get is passed on to the dioceses. So it's not like the Bishops' Conference is sitting on $80 million.
No. It goes right out in services.
Right. So we do have government grants in the system, and if we get cut, then we might have to reduce our staff.
And upwards of $1 million goes to these administrative costs, right? To pay for the building and utilities and other things. How will that, if that money's cut back, won't that affect your bottom line?
Well, it'll affect our staff.
At the conference-wide?
The conference-wide, I would have to go back and look at that, but I don't think it would affect the whole conference in itself, but it would affect our staff.
We're getting emails. Is there a moral obligation to the rule of law?
Yes.
And to fulfill the rule of law?
Yes. And I would agree that there is a moral obligation to support the rule of law, but there is a moral obligation as well that laws be fairly administered and are just in their application. And I think that's what the bishops are saying here.
It's saying here, this is from Canada, and it's a lady saying, please comment on Canada's immigration system. Are you at all familiar with the...
Somewhat, yeah. Canada has an interesting one. They're getting more and more migrants now because migrants are going to Canada because of our border being shut in the south. And they have a good guest worker program there where they bring in migrant workers legally that we can take a lesson from. And they also provide asylum seekers protection as well. So, I mean, they aren't as generous as the United States is, and I will say to you, Raymond, we are a very generous country when it comes to immigration. But we would also argue that overall it's benefited us in our history.
No doubt. But there is also the added difficulty, and I know you're encountering it as well, the homeland security and the terrorist threat of people coming into the country, meaning harm to the country.
Right.
And I know recently Homeland Security has sort of increased their checks on refugees.
Yes.
Decreasing the number of refugees that you're handling, I'm sure, in the system, right? In the resettlement.
Yeah, and we fully support that. Every refugee is checked, not once but twice. They go through 3 or 4 interviews before they're even approved to come to the United States. It's one of the safest programs out there in terms of protecting against those who might come and cause us harm.
Here's a comment from Diana in California. She's not in California, rather. These aren't poor little kids. She's talking about the DREAM Act. She said it encompasses people up to 30 years of age. My kids would have loved to go to a school in California for in-state tuition. No way. We are citizens in this country and have to pay exorbitant out-of-state tuition. You'd say what to her?
Well, I think it's a fair comment. I mean, but what we're saying is that these are people that have no other options. They're bright people. We should at least give them a chance to be successful. And by doing that, it makes us all successful. And so that's what we're saying. We're not saying that they necessarily should be taking money away from U.S. citizens.
Here's Michael writing from New Jersey. What to do about the 10 to 20 million here illegally? He's objecting to the use of the words. He said, it seems you've moved from undocumented workers and now you've developed into out of status is the new descriptor. He says, what do you do with the 10 to 20 million here illegally? Prosecute those who hire them, and the jobs will go to unemployed Americans, and those here illegally will go home voluntarily. What do you say?
Well, I don't think that's realistic because we've put $120 billion in the last 10 years into immigration enforcement in this country, and we still got 11 to 10 million people who are undocumented. We're not going to be able to enforce them out of the country, and they're not going to leave. There's over 50% of them have been here 10 years or more. And they've built equities in this country. They have U.S. citizen children. So throwing more and more enforcement at them is not going to solve the problem.
When I talk to people on the Hill about this, they say the reason they're here is because there's no penalty for staying here, because there is no one enforcing it. But if you enforce the laws on the books, people will naturally emigrate out and then come in, get in line and come in the proper way.
Right. Well, I don't think that's a realistic. They've been trying that for the last 10 years, and people aren't leaving. They really have no place to go back to because this is really their home for many of them now.
Is it moral? Is it ever moral to deport an immigrant?
Well, I think it's within the right of the sovereign, certainly. I don't know if I will define moral in that sense, but certainly the sovereign has the right to do that because they are here illegally. They are here illegally.
Let's talk about this family separation. I know the bishops spend a lot of time on this. There's someone I know who worked, assisted us. She was fantastic. Educated at a Ivy League college. Her father had some difficulty in the past. She and her brother were raised here, went to school here, came here as infants. They're all facing deportation now. And some would say, and I've seen emails, well, you know, they came in illegally. What would you say?
Well, let me just say this. When the Pope came in 2008 to Washington, the second question he answered on the plane over was about immigration. And he said that there needed to be a solution, a regional solution to it, that all the countries need to work on it. The second thing he said was about families, separating the social fabric and ripping the social fabric out of immigrant communities. So we need to consider that. That's probably the bishop's foremost concern in this whole issue, is that we see U.S. citizen children and their parents who are undocumented being taken away from them. And that has really a social consequence that we really need to look at.
This is Michael writes, and I'll get to this very quickly. Immigration, by definition, is a legal process, not a way of traveling between nations. In history, our nation has turned aside to ignore illegal crossing of the border when it was seen as an advantage to us. He says all the excuses being given is to permit a single group, such as a blatant excuse for getting citizenship ahead of others. Is that what's happening here?
No, what is happening, and the Pope mentioned it, is globalization. We're in a globalized world where we exchange capital, communications, goods at a moment's notice. There are jobs in certain countries and there are workers in certain countries, but we cannot get our hands around the fact that workers are moving to the jobs. We need to legalize that stream.
Very good. We're getting a lot of people saying, it sounds like amnesty or open borders. Quickly respond.
It's not amnesty. We're making them pay taxes, pay a fine, work, and get in the back of the line. That's not an amnesty.
Kevin Appleby, thank you so much for being here. Come back to the show. We'll have to have a larger discussion on this. We've got so many emails. Until next week, you can find updates and the occasional commentary by following me on Twitter or on my Facebook fan page. Just go to RaymondArroyo.com. You can click through from there. Also, Kevin Appleby can be found on the USCCB website. There's a Migration and Refugee Services area there. You can also sign up for my e-blast and get your free copy of the Truth and Life audio Bible. The Gospel of Mark is there on my site as well. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Bye now.